Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm sharing my journey of configuring Nexus IQ Server to integrate with Entra ID, formerly known as Azure AD, using SAML. This process was a bit different from other Entra SAML integrations I've done, so I thought it'd be helpful to walk you through it. For those not aware, Nexus IQ is like a gatekeeper for your software development. It helps enterprises manage the risks associated with using open source components. It scans your application code, identifies security vulnerabilities and licensing issues, and gives you clear guidance on how to fix them. This ensures your software is secure, compliant, and built efficiently. I won't be going over the actual configuration with you, as the Nexus IQ's documentation for SAML integration is pretty straightforward to follow. What I'd like to share with you are the two aspects of the integration that stood out for me. First is the trimming of the federation metadata XML. And second is the Nexus IQ RBAC. How do we tell Nexus IQ that a user has a particular role? So let's start with the first aspect of needing to trim the federation XML file that you've downloaded from Entra. This was a first for me, despite having done several SAML integrations with Entra and before that ADFS. I've never had to remove sections from the XML file that I've downloaded from Entra. If you're like me and you come across this, don't worry. This is what Nexus IQ and other Nexus applications actually expect as the metadata file structure. According to Nexus, the federation metadata generated by Microsoft is non-standard SAML metadata. Just remove these sections from the XML file and you're good to go. Now let's dive into role mapping, which works a bit differently in Nexus IQ compared to other apps. Nexus IQ has several internal roles that we need to map to Entra groups, or users if you wish. These roles define user permissions within the IQ server. Unlike Nexus repository, if you've come across that, IQ doesn't expose role mapping functionality on the UI. We need to use REST API calls to set this up. You'll need to provide the Entra ID object ID or the user's object ID and map it to the corresponding role ID in the IQ server. To simplify this process, I've created a PowerShell script. This script essentially bridges the gap between your Entra ID groups and the Nexus IQ roles. Instead of manually assigning users to roles in Nexus IQ, you manage them in Entra ID. The script then automatically maps those Entra ID groups to the corresponding roles in Nexus IQ. So let's break down how it works. Okay, let's walk through the script. First, the script takes a few key inputs, and it is found here in the parameters block. It needs the base URL of your Nexus IQ server, the object ID of the Entra group you want to assign, and your Nexus IQ administrator username, which has a default value of admin. The admin password is handled securely in the script itself through a prompt, which is this line here. To talk to the Nexus IQ API, we need to authenticate. And that's constructed in this block here for headers. And it's what we call an authorization header. It takes our username and password, combines them into a single string, and then encodes that string in a way that Nexus IQ accepts. This encoded string is like a digital signature, proving that we are who we say we are. Now let's take a closer look at the functions within the script. First is the function called invoke Nexus API. This is our workhorse function. Its job is to make calls to the Nexus IQ API. Think of it as the messenger that sends and receives information between our script and the Nexus IQ server. It takes a few inputs. First is the endpoint, which specifies where in the Nexus IQ API we want to go, like a specific address. Then next is the method. This tells the API what we want to do, usually a get to retrieve data or put to update data. And finally, the body. The body is where the actual data might be sending to Nexus IQ, like the group ID we want to assign to a role. This function also handles errors. It has a try-catch block, which means if there's an attempt to make an API call and something goes wrong, maybe the server is down or we don't have the right permissions, the catch block will grab the error and display a message so we know what went wrong. The second function is called the assign group to role function. It's a bit more specialized. It uses the invoke Nexus API function we just talked about to actually assign a group to a specific role in Nexus IQ. And it takes in these two parameters, role ID and group ID. These are the IDs that link a role to the group in Nexus IQ. It constructs the correct API endpoint and then calls invoke Nexus API with a put method to update the role membership. So invoke Nexus API is the general purpose messenger for talking to the Nexus IQ API, and assign group to role uses that messenger to perform the specific task of assigning a group to a role. These two functions work together to automate the role mapping process, saving you a lot of manual work. Next is the main script logic. As you can see, there's also a try-catch block, as what we've had in the invoke Nexus API. This is the main logic that ties everything together. First, we need to get a list of the available roles in Nexus IQ. We do this by calling our invoke Nexus API and using the endpoint API v2 roles. This retrieves all the roles and stores them in a variable called roles response. Think of it as getting a menu of all the roles Nexus IQ has to offer. Next, we need to find the specific roles we want to assign our group to. In this example, we're focusing on the system administrator and policy administrator roles. We loop through the roles response and extract the unique IDs of these two roles. These IDs are essential for telling Nexus IQ which roles we're targeting. Now this bit here is just doing a quick check whether it found the unique role IDs for system administrator and policy administrator. With the role IDs in hand, we can now assign our Entra groups. We call the assign group to role function twice, once for the system administrator role and once for the policy admin role, passing in the respective role IDs and the group Entra group IDs. And this is where the actual mapping happens. Finally, we verify that the assignments were successful. We make another API call, this time to API v2 role memberships global, to get the current role memberships. We then display this information so you can confirm that the group was correctly assigned to the roles. So to recap, the main script logic retrieves the roles, finds the specific roles we need, assigns the Entra ID group to those roles, and then verifies the assignments. It's a straightforward process, but it automates a task that would otherwise be time-consuming and prone to error if done manually. So that was the script. I hope you've learned something from it. You can find it on my GitHub repo with a link in the description below. Now that you've mapped the group to the Nexus IQ role, the next time you sign in via SAML, Nexus IQ will give you the appropriate role. How does it know this? Through the SAML claim that you present to Nexus IQ, which includes the groups that you're a member of. Nexus IQ goes over that list and applies the role based on the configuration you've made. I hope sharing this experience in script helps you save time when configuring your own Nexus IQ server instance. Remember, the key points are trimming the federation XML file, and second, using a script, like what I've shared with you, to make API calls for role mapping. Thanks for watching and see you next time.